So, yeah, let's start with some meditation and then we will get started on talking about loneliness. So, let's relax. Again, we remember the four steps: relax the body, don't trouble it, relax the mind, slip into silence, and place yourself in the presence of the divine, whatever that means to you. Higher self, higher power. So, we do that. So, let's relax. Pay attention to where any tension may be sitting in the body. And relax the body. Take a deep breath, and as you exhale, experience the body relaxing. Relax your feet, the muscles of your legs. Relax your stomach and your chest. Relax your shoulders, your arms, your hands and fingers. Relax the muscles of your neck. Notice how tension sits in the tiny muscles of the face and relax these. Relax the tiny muscles around your mouth, your eyes, your forehead. Feel a wave of relaxation flowing throughout your body, from the top of the head to the tip of the toes. Then pay attention to where the mind is being pulled, perhaps some thoughts of the past, concerns in the present, apprehensions of the future. Don't fight these thoughts. Just let them be. And allow them to settle down. You can see these as particles of sand in a lake of water. And you allow these particles of sand to settle down gently into the bottom of the lake. The lake of the mind. Making the waters of the mind still clear. And as the mind settles down, listen to the silence within. The silence in which all thought, feeling enters. The silence of soul. And holding on to the silence, you place yourself in the presence of the divine. And just allow yourself to become very, very still. If the mind is pulled by any other thought, let the thought come and go. Just allow yourself to slip beneath these thoughts. Into silence. And holding on to this deep silence of soul, your innermost essence. You allow yourself to gently return back to the awareness of this room, allowing your eyes to blink open looking out into this room. Okay. So we will talk about loneliness today. So let's try and capture this on the board. Yeah, I was looking at the history of loneliness. There are some interesting things. So what I read was that until like 1800, you know, around the time of the so-called Enlightenment, at least in the Western world, what was called Enlightenment, um, loneliness did not necessarily have many negative associations. And then somehow post, the Industrial Revolution, I guess around that time in the Enlightenment, it started having these negative associations. And some people argue that's because of, the industrialized society. People started getting more and more detached and busy with, efficiency and productivity, and the ways of life began to change. And since then, the word loneliness has begun to have quite a few, and mainly negative associations. So normally, when we talk about loneliness, they talk about this uh, a state of disconnection. We somehow don't feel connected in some way. There is a sense of disconnection. There is also this sense of lack of intimacy. And normally people talk about the intimacy of human relations. We don't have that. Some researchers who are looking at loneliness, they also say that there is this sense of emptiness that people feel. But along with the sense of emptiness, there can also be this experience of worthlessness, that I am not good enough in some way. And some people can have that experience that, well, I don't have close friends, I don't have intimate relationships, maybe because I'm not good enough, I'm not worth. And that can be the subjective experience, even though we may not always consciously report it as such, that could be the subjective experience of loneliness. So that's the inner experience. Um, and some people also talk about what are the consequences and all that, but we know the consequences of loneliness. If you look at research, it has physical consequences in terms of health. In some studies, it is shown that it is even more risky than obesity in terms of leading to an early mortality. More risky than obesity, almost roughly the same as smoking. So it has significant impact. It reduces our immunity. And some experimental studies have shown that if you have people who are having a common cold, and you put some people in the loneliness condition and in the other who are not in the loneliness condition, it takes longer for the people in the loneliness condition to recover from a common cold. So it takes longer for people to recover from an illness if there is this experience of loneliness. It has been related to dementia, Alzheimer's, higher risk of dementia, Alzheimer's in people with loneliness. So we see that it has significant health, consequences. Even mental health, we know depression clearly is related to loneliness. So we see that, and therefore some people like the American Surgeon General, the health minister, they call the Surgeon General in the U.S. In 2021, he said that we have an epidemic of loneliness. Also because it has so many costs in terms of the economy and health system and all that. And in 2023, last year in November, the World Health Organization has labeled loneliness as one of the major health problems. and they have set up a commission to investigate loneliness. So people are paying a lot of attention to it. In Denmark, also, I've heard people talking a lot about that loneliness, and what do we do to overcome that, and how do we work with our societies in a way that we can help people overcome loneliness. So there is a lot of talk about that. So it has significant consequences. So physical and psychological. But then I was also looking at some other work around the political consequences of loneliness, social and political consequences. There is a German American historian and philosopher. Her name is Hannah Arendt. She's written a book on this. It's very interesting. I don't know to what extent it is applicable to all situations, but she says this is her thesis that totalitarian regimes, when they emerge, a very important prerequisite for totalitarianism and populism to emerge is loneliness. That's her thesis. And there is a professor at the University College of London, I forget her name. She has been also working on that. She also says there's a lot of empirical support for that position. That as societies become more and more lonely, as individuals become more and more lonely, they tend to experience more suspicion. They feel more suspicious. And because they are more suspicious, then they would like to protect their societies in some ways. And then that leads to the rise of totalitarianism and populism, which is an interesting thesis to look at. I mean, but we do know that loneliness does compromise our social skills in some ways. We are unable to understand how the other person is feeling or what the other person is going through. That does happen. And because of this impact on our social skills, we can imagine that we are unable to relate to other people who are different. So it seems to also have some social and political consequences for our societies, um, which is interesting because many of us live in families, many of us are married. And then I was looking at who are the people who would be more likely to be lonely. What do you think in terms of age group? Who do you think would be, the population more at risk of loneliness?
The young ones too.
Actually, yes. Many people will say the elderly, but actually the younger people are more lonely than the elderly. The BBC did a big study in 2018. It's called the Loneliness Experiment. More than 55,000 cases from around the world. And the loneliness in the age group of 17 to 24, that's like more than 40%. And over 75, people who are more than 75, it was only 27%. I mean, that's also something. But younger people tend to actually be lonelier than older people. That's one thing we see. What about relationships? What would you expect? People who are in a close relationship, who are married, as against those who are not married. What would you expect?
Those
Sorry?
those that are married.
Would be more lonely?
Mm.
Okay, interesting. What would you say?
Say singles.
The singles would be more lonely? Yeah. Okay. Maybe we have different experiences.
Yeah.
But if you look at the research from the same study, from the BBC study and other studies as well, they showed that amongst the people, so they did a survey of thousands of cases, and then they looked at, okay, these are the people who are feeling lonely. It was around 40 something percent of the surveyed population that had chronic loneliness. So we all go through momentary loneliness, but chronic loneliness over a long period of time. In that population, they looked at marriage as a possible predictor. More than half of the people were actually married. More than half, but not like a significantly bigger majority compared to those. So it seems to be that whether you're married or not, you more or less have, you're equally likely to feel lonely. People who have close relationships also feel lonely. People who have so-called success, career success, no difference really there. They also feel lonely. And then they looked at social skills. And people who feel lonely, if you compare them with people who don't feel lonely, it's not like they have better or worse social skills. It's roughly the same. So many people say, "Oh, people are maybe they don't have the social skills to go out and meet people," but apparently there is no big difference there. Another interesting thing: people who feel lonely tend to even have more empathy. So I don't know how that works because some other research also shows that people who are lonely tend to also prefer totalitarian and populist regimes. So how does it go with empathy? I don't know. Different research sources show some different findings. So I don't know. Uh, but it seems to be something that anybody can experience. And what we think, oh, by the way, which season would people feel more lonely in? People would say winter. Research shows there isn't any difference. Winter, summer, season doesn't seem to make a difference. We have that assumption during winter time, people will feel more lonely. It's a festival time in many parts of the world, and then people don't have anyone to socialize with, therefore they feel lonely. That doesn't seem to be the case. So that's an interesting thing that we see in loneliness. But let's try and understand and go a little bit deeper into which kinds of loneliness we see. So if you look at the research, we look at two main kinds of loneliness. So this is the experience that we talk about. So one is this what is most commonly studied, social loneliness. This lack of a network, a social network, but it could also be a lack of a community. And this could be, don't have friends to go out with, or you don't have, friends to talk to and socialize with, or hang out with on the weekends or in the evenings. That's one part of it. But the other is also this lack of community. And some people call it a cultural loneliness, inability to connect with a local culture. And this can happen to people who move to a new country. We experience that, some of us, right? Unable to connect to the local culture. But it also happens to people who return back to their home country after a long time. They're unable to connect back to the home culture because they have changed, they have grown, and they are thinking differently. And then they come back. I have a friend who had moved away from Denmark, and then she came back just after like a couple of years, and she felt a sense of homesickness. But she was back home because she had some big experiences. She had grown, she had developed, and when she came back, she would talk to people about it, and people couldn't recognize that. She had no one to talk to in that way. So the sense of alienation from the larger society, this lack of community, that people don't get me, people don't understand me, and I'm unable to really relate to people. It can happen to anybody. Uh, we can be in our so-called our home country and still feel the same. So we see that, and a lot of work has been done around that. And normally, when we talk about loneliness in research, but also when we look at policy, public policy, and organizations like the World Health Organization that work with loneliness, there is a lot of effort in creating possibilities for people to interact. Becoming a part of a hobby group or some interest group and finding some sort of a community with whom you can bond in some way, at least meet once a week or twice a week and break that. And obviously, that's very, very important. And we have many initiatives like that. So the good part of the story is that the social loneliness is probably the easiest thing to address, even though it's difficult to address, because you can create possibilities, then getting people to actually take advantage of these possibilities and all, it's not always very, very easy. But it's still probably the lesser problematic aspect of loneliness. So this is the the social, you could say, loneliness. The other aspect is the emotional, and this becomes very difficult to address because here we are talking about this lack of intimate relationships, lack of intimacy, lack of relationships that are nurturing, people who can support us, people who we can grow with, people who we can in some way, relate to, the sense of emotional attachment or closeness with somebody, that becomes difficult to work with. Because typically, that kind of emotional intimacy comes in close relationships, right? Either in a marital relationship or in some sort of a romantic relationship. We talked about romantic love in the previous session. But it could also be close friendships, which are not romantic, but close friendships. But the sense of closeness and intimacy that somebody cares for you, somebody really cares for you, and somebody will be there. If something happens, somebody will be there for you. Somebody who can help us grow, and somebody who can nurture us. So that experience of that loving, close relationship, and that becomes very, very difficult to manage, to organize. How do you organize that? At a societal level, we can organize clubs and some sort of a people's kitchen as we have in Denmark. People can meet once a week and meet strangers and have a nice conversation. That we can organize at a social level. How do you organize that at a social level? That becomes very, very tough. And that becomes a difficult aspect of loneliness to work with. How do you even address that issue? And then some people say we need some skill development and things like that, but it's not so easy, right? Because many of these people have skills, they have good social skills, but they don't have those intimate relationships. And the world as it has become, it becomes difficult, right? How do you create that? Especially for people, most of these relationships are made in school with friends, typically, right? In school, growing up, sometimes also at the university level. And then after that, it becomes more and more difficult, at least in some parts of the world, becomes more and more difficult. For some people, they also make close friendships at work, but it is lesser common than at school and at the university. And so, especially if somebody grows up and moves to a different, even within the small country of Denmark, if you move from Aarhus to Copenhagen, it becomes a challenge. As an adult, move for a job, it becomes a challenge because our network is there in the town that we grew up, we went to school in, and then we move to a new town. We don't know people. It becomes really, really tough. uh, in the olden days, people lived close to each other, and they sort of, it's different. It's different today. So that becomes very, very difficult to deal with. But we'll add another dimension, and this is what I would like to talk about more because I believe, again, this is my theory. I believe this aspect of loneliness becomes perhaps the most critical, and I would call it spiritual loneliness. Um, it is different from this, and a lot of research is there on this. And the problem is, how do you even do research on something like spiritual loneliness? But as I understand it, it's a feeling of disconnection with soul, with our essence. Now the question is, do we have an essence? So many people will say there is no essence. There is nothing beyond, the body and what we take in from the body. So that becomes sometimes an issue of faith. But I don't know if it necessarily has to do with faith in the metaphysical. It can help to have some sort of a faith in the metaphysical, like faith in God, faith in soul, like soul as an entity that survives this body and things like that. But many people do not have that faith. And then I have often asked myself, how do you talk about soul when people don't have any such metaphysical faith in the continuance of identity after the body? How do you? So many existential philosophers, they talked about loneliness as an essential human condition, like Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus and many others like that. Søren Kierkegaard was a little different because he was a believer. He had a faith in God. So he was also an existentialist, but he talked about it differently. He talks about these three forms of life: the aesthetic, the ethical, and the religious. So for Kierkegaard, it was the aesthetic life is the life of pleasure and beauty and appreciating beauty and getting stimulation from the world. And then there was the ethical life, where we go beyond aesthetics and we look at how are our actions impacting the world? How are my actions impacting my neighbor? How are my actions impacting those who are close to me? So looking at the ethical aspect. And then he says the religious life for him was the life dedicated to uh, God. He positions that as the highest. But many of the other existential philosophers, they don't take that leap of faith. They say that's an irrational leap. Like Sartre and Camus, and they would say, well, it is an essential human condition, and we have to learn to find meaning within the reality of the absurdity of life. That's what they would say, because life will end at some point, and that's the absurdity of life. But we still have to find meaning in that. So I think over time, I have a faith. So I have that bias, right? I believe in soul as an essence, and I believe that there is a higher power out there, source of healing in the universe. But many people don't. But then over time, I've begun to feel that maybe it's not that important, that faith. But what is more important is to figure out what is the essence, what is it? So when we talk about the soul, I talk about this essence. What is it that really gives meaning to me? And we don't have to have a faith in some sort of a metaphysical notion of soul or God to understand that there are certain things that give meaning to me. So today we will try and go into that a little bit. Um, but before that, maybe it could be useful to look at this disconnection with the soul, because my understanding is that when we are disconnected with the soul, it is difficult to actually establish intimate relationships because of certain other mechanisms that we will talk about. And it is also difficult, really, to engage with our society in a productive way. Because my understanding is when we lose touch with the essence, um, then in some way we feel the sense of neediness. We feel the sense of neediness, and we would like to find some sort of compensation in the world outside, some way of filling up this emptiness that we feel inside, this hollowness, um, this existential void. Some people talk about this existential void, the sense of emptiness. There is nothing there. And so many a times when we feel that sense of emptiness, we want to fill that emptiness with something. We want to fill it with something. Um, and one of the ways that we can try and fill this is just through consumption. We consume and we consume and we consume. And this could be different forms of consumption. Going back to psychoanalysis, Freud had talked about oral fixation, right? You know, when the oral needs, the needs of the baby are not taken care of, and the baby is not fed properly or overfed maybe or something like that, when they are not properly balanced, those needs, then you develop this sort of fixation, and then you want to consume and consume and consume to compensate for that lack of love in some way. So that consumption can be eating a lot, eating sweet things. Somehow how many of us end up eating sweet things like chocolates and cakes when things are not going well in our lives? Many of us do that. High calorie diets, this consuming and filling up that void in some way. So it can be that kind of physical consumption, but it could also be just, traveling a lot and trying to get the stimulation. So we feel good inside. We feel good inside. It could be sex, for example. Having sex, many people can just engage in sex again and again because it is pleasurable. And then there is this inner emptiness that is driving us to seek more and more of that. So this sort of consumption, it could be food, it could be sex, it could be travel, or anything else, right? We consume and consume and consume to try and fill up that emptiness. And we can even argue, and this is my thesis, that the problems that we are facing in the world around climate change, they emerge from deep loneliness. We know we are destroying the world. We know that, but we don't seem to be able to stop consuming. Look at us in Denmark. We have such a huge carbon footprint because of the travel. So many of us travel every time, go to some warm place, go to some warm place every time, and we travel so much. So inside the country, we say, oh, we have all this renewable energy and all that. But then we travel so much in the world and we leave such a big carbon footprint in the world. We import so many things from different parts of the world, right? We want the best of the things out there. People, we are bringing in stuff from South America and whatever, Asia, and we want to consume. And we have the wealth, we have the money, therefore we want to consume. So honestly, I feel if we have to address the issue of climate change, we probably have to address the issue of loneliness. We feel so disconnected with our inner self, and we feel so empty inside that we have to fill up, fill up, fill up, fill up, and we destroy the world. So when the World Health Organization is actually looking at loneliness as a serious health problem, I would say yes, a serious health problem. But it probably has a bigger impact than just our physical health. So that is one pattern that we see emerging from this inner existential loneliness. Then we also have this experience of fear. And many a times because of this feeling of worthlessness, I don't know if I'm good enough to have relationships, to sustain relationships, or maybe if I have a relationship with a friend who seems to be more successful in the stereotypical way that I have learned the definition of success, right? Having a certain career, having maybe a family, having children. We learn all these notions of what is success and what is not successful, what is not success, right? So, for example, if you have a so-called good career and a good job, and you're earning decent amount of money, and you're having a spouse and some children, and material things like that, like a car, a nice car, and things like that. We learn this, we pick it up. And if I have a friend who really cares for me, but I see that according to these things I've learned from the world, that person is more successful, quote unquote, successful according to the standards of the world. And then every time, and then I feel I am not that successful because I just have a Peugeot and the other has I don't know, a Ferrari, something like that. And the other has, I don't know, three children and whatever, a spouse. And then every time I meet this friend of mine, I feel bad. And then I can stop meeting him. Because every time I meet him, I feel bad. And then I lose somebody who actually cares for me. And this fear can make us push away others. We push people away, people who care for us, people who actually want to be with us. And they're not looking at us as that, but I am looking at myself as maybe worthless in some way, and I can push people away because of the fear. And that doesn't help because that only deepens the loneliness. And I push people away, then I want to have some compensation, then I can consume more and things like that, and it doesn't help at all. The other pattern is anxiety. It's a little different from fear. Anxiety is, I'm afraid of something happening in terms of losing something that I have. And typically an anxious attachment is I hold on, and I hold on too much. And because of that, I may end up burdening. I can end up burdening others because then I want too much of their attention, and if they don't give me attention, I feel insecure, and then I want more. I want to spend too much time with them, and then they also want to do other things, and then that they're unable to do it because they have to take care of me, and then they feel burdened. But then I can also burden myself. I can burden myself because I'm afraid I will lose the other, and then I end up doing too much to hold on to that relationship, and that also doesn't help, and that doesn't really resolve the issue of the loneliness, of the existential emptiness. In the short term, yes, it may. So if I sit today and I talk to you and I feel a little better, but then at the end of the day, the inner emptiness is going to come out again. And then related to the experience of anxiety, I may end up compromising, where I push myself away because I am so needy and I am so desperate to have any kind of relationship that I may end up getting into relationships that are not good for me. I remember a friend of mine, he was living in Prague for some time. He's Danish, but he's living there for some time. And he said, I was feeling so lonely, so lonely. And I just wanted anything, anybody, any. And then he got into a relationship, and it was terrible for both. It was just terrible. They were not a good match. And then the lady felt he was pulling her down, and then he feels that she is pulling him down. It was just a very, 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 very bad relationship. They had a child, and the child gets affected by that relationship. The whole thing goes on. So that can also happen, that we push our own self away. We push who we are and what we need, and we don't respect that. We just get into any relationship to fix. Many a times we have these relationships of codependence, where we get into a relationship with somebody who feeds our dependence, and it doesn't help us. It doesn't help the other. But we are so desperate that we want that relationship. We hold on to that relationship, and then it doesn't really help in the longer run. So we push ourselves away. We push our own needs away, and that doesn't help either. And eventually, the loneliness is still there. It's going to come back. It's going to resurface, and it's going to have a problem for us anyway. So the question is, let's focus a little bit on how do we deal with this. That's our maybe, are there solutions, and what are those solutions? So we will try and go back in history again. So if you go back in history, before the industrial age, before the so-called Enlightenment, go back, way back. In the Middle Ages, terrible times, at least in the Western world, and even way back, if you look at recorded history, people talked about different kinds of loneliness. And so they talk about this experience of being alone. There is the pain of being alone. And that is how we understand loneliness these days, the pain of being alone. And by the way, it's very interesting. Brain studies, that have looked at the brain, how the brain lights up when people are feeling lonely, or how the brain shuts down when people are feeling lonely. It seems to have a very, very similar reaction. Our brain, it seems to have very, very similar reaction to loneliness as to physical pain. The same parts of the brain get activated. It's because it is painful. So it's that pain of being alone. And so normally today, when we talk about loneliness, we are normally referring to loneliness as the pain of being alone. It's not nice to be alone. But loneliness has not always been seen like that. For a long time, loneliness was actually seen as a joy of being alone. And this is, the experience of what we will call solitude, which is different perhaps from loneliness. But earlier we didn't have so many words, I guess. But if you look at history, many of the old legends and myths are about these heroes or heroines like Gilgamesh, right? Gilgamesh from the ancient Mesopotamian civilization. Or you have Hercules from the Greek, mythology, or you have Hanuman from the Indian mythology, and you have many of these heroes and heroines. In their story, you will always see they disappear into the wilderness for some years. They go away into the wilderness, sometimes into the desert, sometimes into the forest. Sometimes they cross the oceans and they go somewhere else, right? The Greek myths, the epics, right? They talk about the heroes taking this big journey on the ocean. And they go, and then they meet so many challenges on this journey, and they have to overcome these challenges quite often on their own. And we have somehow preserved these myths even today. And why? I've often asked myself, why do we do that? Right? There is something about this discovery of self that can happen only in solitude. So there, this being alone was also seen as a way of discovery. You find out who you are. You know, we talk about essence. So many a times we look at essence as a metaphysical concept. But I would also look at essence as not necessarily metaphysical. Essence is figuring out who we are really deep inside. Who are we? The discovery of self. And all these heroes and heroines that spend time overcoming these challenges. They have all these challenges. In many myths, you have these demons, right? They come out and you have to fight and you have to kill these demons. This is to me, in some way, it is symbolic of us fighting with our own inner demons, our emptiness, our own inner negativity, all the experiences of the past that we are carrying inside us that are painful. We need to, in some way, along with the discovery, there is also the confrontation with the self, with all these painful experiences that we may have inside us, which are very, very difficult sometimes to look at and to negotiate with and to navigate through. But that needs to be done. This confrontation, which leads to this transformation. So in these heroes, in the myth of Gilgamesh, for example, or in the myth of Hercules or Hanuman, they are able to overcome. They are able to overcome these challenges, and they are able to transform in some way. And these are the so solitude is it can be a beautiful experience. Of course, we need to know how to navigate through solitude. But if we can use loneliness, and I would argue that when we feel lonely, it is actually a call. Our unconscious is creating a call. It is a call for us to connect with soul, with the essence. So when we are feeling this, it is actually a call. And many a times we get afraid of being lonely. I would say give into it and see what emerges on the other side. Be the hero of these myths of the past. Go into that desert. Go onto these oceans of our own unconscious. Go into those forests of our own inner self. Of course, we need some guidance there and some help sometimes. That could be very, very useful. But there is no other way. And whenever we feel lonely, it's a call. It's a call. It is, first of all, it's a signal that I have disconnected from soul. I have disconnected from soul. And it's a call of the soul to reconnect with the self again. So we can take it as a call and we can answer the call. Many of us are, of course, afraid of that call because then we have to deal with all this inner stuff that we would rather not deal with. And then we avoid answering the call. But how long will we avoid answering the call? If you look at what's happening in the world, it's an urgency. We have to listen to that call. Because, this neediness, this compensation, this can manifest itself at the personal level. It can manifest itself at the social level. It can manifest itself at the larger cultural level. What do I mean by that? So this neediness at the personal level, for example, I want to consume. So I want to keep eating stuff and, which is not good for me. I keep doing it because I have to fill up myself in some way. Yeah. It can manifest itself in this way that I push away others who actually care for me instead of reaching out to them. It can manifest itself in the way that I burden myself on others too much because I'm holding on to them. It can also manifest itself in this way that I push myself away and I end up compromising in terms of what is good for me. It can have social costs. We've looked at that. For example, when we feel lonely, we also sometimes feel suspicious of others, and we feel this threat, and we become hyper vigilant. And when we become hyper vigilant, then of course I may be suspecting others. I may be suspecting my neighbor's intentions, good, or whoever it is I'm interacting with, and that has social costs, but also cultural. Because one of the ways in which many of us human beings try to solve the problem of loneliness is by having a very strong association with a cultural identity. It could be a religious identity, it could be a national cultural identity, yeah, ethnic identity. We hold on to that. And the more we hold on to that, the more we get threatened by other identities that are different. And that has major consequences. Then we want to lock others out. And then in extreme cases, we can even justify killing others because the others, we've talked about morality before, because the others have lower moral status. And therefore, we deserve to live more than them. And they can die, but we have to preserve somehow. We, the collective we. So we can also fixate or attach ourselves so strongly to that cultural identity as a way of protecting that self, as a way of feeling that sense of connectedness, because we want to have that connectedness. And I find my connectedness in being American or being Danish or being Israeli or being Palestinian or being Muslim or being Christian or being Jewish. I find that. And then I hold on to it. And there's nothing wrong with that in a way because I'm feeling good. But the problem, the flip side of that is then I end up discriminating against others. And then I can end up engaging in or supporting others in engaging in very serious atrocities towards those I don't identify with, other cultures, evil cultures, so called, in my mind. So it has major implications. And I feel if we don't get it right, we have the challenge of climate change that comes from our this sort of desperate need to consume and consume and consume and consume. And we know we are destroying it, but we still want to consume. And the second, identity-based conflicts that we are seeing in the world, the wars that are shaping up in some ways, be it Russia, Ukraine, be it Israel, Palestine, or be it other parts of the world in which we are seeing conflicts, ethnic conflicts in other countries in Asia and in other parts of the world. So I think it's really the call of our times, really, to connect with our inner essence. Otherwise, it might be difficult for us to really find solutions to these issues. So let's go back to this, right? So this discovery of self and the confrontation with self becomes a very important part, and the transformation of the self. How do we actually do that? How do we actually address or answer this call for us to connect with soul? So there are two things, right? So one is, of course, there is a need for a healing of past, because if my own relationship with the self is damaged, if there are parts of me that are creating threat, so fear can also create the experience of threat. Now, one, I am feeling threatened by you in some way. It could be that you have a different cultural identity and I have a different cultural identity, and I feel threatened that you are going to destroy my cultural identity. So it could be that. Or I could just feel the threat that, okay, today you are here for me, tomorrow you will not be there for me. So there's the threat that ultimately you will leave me and therefore I reject you. That kind of a threat. But the threat can also be internal. I can feel a threat coming from parts of me that I have pushed away. Parts of me that I have pushed away that I do not like, that I feel are not good, that I feel are worthless. And that also requires healing, because without that, and if I push away parts of me, I am going to feel lonely because I'm not connected to a part of myself, and I'm going to feel lonely because of that. There is an alienation of parts of myself, And there is a reason for the alienation, because some of these parts are connected to trauma, they're connected to pain. So I'm not able to sometimes even confront that. And therefore, the confrontation that we talk about requires healing. If this healing hasn't happened, it is very, very difficult to confront. So this process is becomes, I think, very, very important. And my understanding is that this kind of healing can happen in the process of meditation. That's my theory, but that's what I feel when we go deep into silence. It's like one of my friends, he also teaches meditation. He says, if you have a wound, if you have an injury, um, sometimes it's very important to keep it still. Not do things to it. Don't irritate it. Just let it be. Slowly, it will heal. So this going into silence, he says, does that work? That you're just letting yourself be, so that the wounds inside the soul, inside the mind, begin to heal in that silence. So that's his understanding, and I think that's very, very nice. But I also feel sometimes it's not enough just to keep still. You need medicine because it's not enough. You need sometimes surgery. You need medicine. So, in my understanding, that's the role of the Supreme. That's the role of the higher power. When we place ourselves in silence, but in the presence of the higher power, there is that surgery happening in the mind, in the soul. Um, some medicine, maybe, the experience of love, maybe, that begins to heal the soul. So that healing becomes very, very important. But it's along with that, there are a couple of other things that I was thinking of. So we talked about essence and this understanding of um, my purpose. What is it that gives me meaning? So this is the classic existentialist way of looking at dealing with loneliness. They would say, well, loneliness is an essential human condition. Uh, but we have to somehow find meaning in the absurdity of life. And this construction of meaning becomes very, very important. I think that is certainly a part of the equation of dealing with loneliness, because how do we deal with our world without understanding, in some ways, why am I here? What purpose do I serve? And many a times when we talk about purpose, we had talked about it in the very first session, I remember. We look at purpose as some sort of a mission, right, that we have to accomplish, some sort of a mission. So say, my purpose is to get rid of inequality in the world, for example. Or my purpose is to create gender equality in the world, or whatever it is. So there's a certain mission. And that's fine. That is also important. But many a times these missions are not, things that we have much control over. I mean, we can do a little bit. It's not like, we are going to just accomplish that tomorrow, especially if the mission is quite complex, like getting rid of economic inequality in the world. That's a very tough task. Hopefully we will reach there somewhere, but sometime, but then it's not something that's going to happen tomorrow. There is another way of looking at purpose, and I found this very useful with myself, but also working with other people in a counseling clinical situation. And this is something I learned, I think, when I was first in my mid-20s, and it was very powerful to look at purpose in this way. And it was in this way. All of us, already have a purpose. And we are already living that purpose. It is something we have done from our childhood. How? We are born with something. If you believe in a metaphysical notion of the soul, then you say, okay, the soul comes into this physical body with something. And if you don't believe in that metaphysical notion of soul, it doesn't really matter. Because when we are born with something. There is already something there. Even children, babies have personalities. There is something there. And that something that is there, in some ways, is our essence. And we are manifesting that as we grow. It could be heredity, whatever it is. We are manifesting that we have certain natural abilities, or at least we have some natural potential that can be developed through certain skills and things like that. So let me give you an illustration. When I was asked this question, and I will ask you this question, going back to your childhood and moving on from your childhood to the present moment, what do you see yourself doing very naturally through which people have been benefited by it? Purpose is connected in some, at least one aspect of purpose is connected with our world in some way. We've all, whoever I've talked to, they always say, yeah, there is something, there is a certain role we end up playing throughout our life. Certain role we end up playing. It could be a few roles that we end up playing, but there are certain roles we end up playing throughout our life. There are certain ways in which we are constantly contributing to our world. From our childhood, we are doing it. I'll give us some examples. So, one person I was working with, he said, oh, my purpose is to be an advertising executive. I said, well, that's a goal. Good. Wish you all the best for that. But what about how have you always contributed to your world from your childhood? What do people receive? What did people receive from you naturally? And we went, of course, I'm just asking you the question, but it's just a process that we can follow. But it's not a very complicated process. It is just asking yourself, what is it that people have always received from me? One. Two, it is asking yourself, what roles have I ended up playing in my life through which people have received something from me? So for him, it was, he said, it's very interesting, but from my childhood, I could always make people laugh. It doesn't matter how serious they were or how serious the situation was. I would walk in, I could make people light. I would say something that would make them smile, that would make them laugh. And he says, I can do that even today. If people, my friends are, very somber and very serious, I'm always able to make them feel easy and light. And then he articulated his purpose as this: to be light and easy and to make others feel light and easy. And that is something he has always been doing. And that is something he can always do. Another person I was working with, we went through this whole process, and then he said, but you know something? I've always been able to make people look at things differently. And through that, they're able to get insight into their own condition, but also into the condition of people around them. And it just happens naturally. People come to me, even when I was a small child, sometimes my friends, I was the one they would come to for advice. I was the one they would come to if they wanted to confide something in somebody, because they knew I would never talk about them to anybody else. So I could engender trust in people, and I could somehow be that pillar of support to people. Another person said, whenever there is a conflict, I don't like the idea of people having a negative conflict. I always like to sort it out. And I've always been able to do that. Always been able to build bridges between people. If two people were having, even my parents, he said, even when my parents were having a fight, I could somehow work in a way that it would, bring them together. So all of us, we are born with certain natural innate abilities, qualities, and they're different for all of us. Even building bridges, you might do it in one way, you might do it in another way, I might do it in another way. So we would say building bridges, but we would all do it in our own unique way. So this understanding of purpose, how is it that I actually experience meaning in my life in terms of contributing to the lives of others? What do people get from me? People always receive something from me. Each human being in this world, even animal beings, but let's talk about humans today. Each human being is already bringing something to their world. We may not be aware of it. And becoming aware of this would also help us understand what our inner values are. So when we talk about essence, it does not have to be a metaphysical notion. For me, essence is about this understanding our purpose in this life. And when we understand that, we can actually engage with the world in a very different way. So when we practice that solitude, that helps us, with the discovery uh, and also confrontation with parts of the self. But that's the thing. To confront the self, I need strength, like the heroes of the myths. They're all strong. Gilgamesh, Hercules, they're also strong. Hanuman, they're also strong. But there is also an understanding that to confront the demons inside us, to confront our own pain, to confront our own trauma, whatever it is that we're carrying inside, that we have to overcome, that we have to transform, we need strength. And in my understanding, that strength can come, that is my belief, when I connect with the higher power and I place myself in the presence of the higher power, I get that strength. But the other way of experiencing strength is engaging with purpose. So when we understand this, we engage with self and other in a very different way. And as we do that, we are able to actually, we find that we are able to overcome the spiritual emptiness in some way, but we are also able to engage with our society in a better way. And we are able to feel more emotional closeness also with others. Because I feel strong. So living my life according to what gives me and others around me value. Expressing that purpose becomes a very, very important part of our own. And the more we do it, the stronger we feel. The stronger we feel, the more we can confront our own inner stuff that we need to confront. So I do feel that the process of meditation is great. It is very, very important in my own experience for the transformation, also for getting the strength. But it's not enough. I have to engage with my world, especially today when the world is calling out. So many people who are suffering, so many who are lonely, and they don't know who to talk to. They don't know what to do about it. There's so many who are struggling with their own trauma and pain. There is so much going on. If I can reach out to the world and I can contribute, if I can contribute to the world in the way that I can, it doesn't have to be, giving a donation of $1 million. I can do it in my own little way. But to help us understand the way I can contribute, solitude becomes important. So I will end here with a final thought from my side. In the previous session, we talked about romantic love. Romantic love is, in some ways, I would say, a projection of the soul onto somebody else. That part of us, the part of me that I am unable to experience myself, I project it onto the other. And I experience it through that person. That person becomes a representation, a symbol of this part of me, my soul, that I've become disconnected with. I'm projecting onto the other, and therefore there is this excitement and this delight and joy. Sorry? Yeah, exactly. That feeling of falling in love, right? Because I'm trying to experience it through you. I'm unable to experience. So romantic love is a projection of the soul. Loneliness is the disconnection from soul. Romantic love is the projection of the soul. Loneliness is the disconnection from soul. And so whenever we feel lonely, it is a call for us to reconnect with soul. And the more we do that, the more we are able to discover our own essence, the way we can contribute to the world, and therefore we can engage with the world in more powerful ways. And over time, we of course, don't feel that lonely because we are connected with who we are deep inside. And then we bring it in our relationships, and we connect better with others. Then we're not afraid of others rejecting us. Then we are not anxious to hold on to people. There is this inner strength, the strength of the mythological Gilgamesh or Hercules or Hanuman. Why are all these heroes only men? I wonder. There are some female heroes as well, right? There is Diana, there is or Artemis in Greek mythology as well, and many others, I think. So Pierre is talking about having had a conversation with one of your friends about how they are helping couples actually overcome the problem of loneliness by being vulnerable, by allowing themselves to be vulnerable. Because vulnerability is very, very important for intimacy. Absolutely. And loneliness is about not feeling that level of intimacy that we talked about. And we can say that it is difficult for people to be vulnerable if they don't feel some level of inner strength. It can be difficult. That strength and support can come from sitting with a therapist, for example, but it can also come in some ways by engaging with the self. But you're right. I think it's very, very important that our ability to be vulnerable becomes an extremely important part of dealing with loneliness, especially when you're looking at close relationships like couples, feeling alienated from each other because we find it difficult to talk about stuff that we should be talking.
You have a history and you didn't, something happened and you
Yeah.
didn't talk about it, and
Yeah.
you are in deficits because of that.
Yes.
So you will not talk about it because
Yeah.
all the mechanisms.
Yeah, yeah. So the past history is actually controlling us.
Yeah.
Oh, last time I tried to explain myself, you didn't understand. So now you will again not understand me.
That's
So
the projection.
yeah, exactly. And I push away the others because I'm afraid if I am vulnerable, you will take advantage of me or you will not understand me. I'm afraid of that. And because of that fear, I push away the other. And then that doesn't help me. That doesn't help the other. It doesn't help the relationship.
Great.
Yeah, eventually many people break up because of that. I wonder, you loved each other so much before, what happened?
Children.
Children happened. Children happened. Blame it on the children. Yes, Sana?
Well, I have experienced a terrible loneliness in a period of my life, some many years ago, and I recognize a lot of the things that you say about the distrust and the neediness and all these things that you say, but you speak of it here as if it's something that you can identify, but I never could. I couldn't identify it when I was living in it. It's first when I came out of it, moved to another country, and had this connection with somebody else, that I could look back at the time and say, that was really, that was a terrible, painful, lonesome time. But for me, it wasn't a feeling. It wasn't, I mean, there was a lot of things wrong that I would feel that was wrong, but loneliness in itself is not a feeling that I could identify. And I saw it here in Corona with our son as well, who had at the same time as the lockdown had just moved away from home and was doing online university and was alone in this apartment. And I could identify a lot of the same things that I also recognized from myself, but he didn't say, I feel lonely, I feel alone here. So I'm thinking that it's looking back, you can look at it, and when you've put a lot of labels on it here, which makes sense, but when you're in it.
Thank you for mentioning that, because that is
quickly for the people on
yeah.
line.
Okay.
Very quickly.
Yes. So basically what Sana was saying was that sometimes when we are in the grip of loneliness, we cannot recognize it. We don't recognize it. And you shared your own experiences also with your son, that sometimes we don't, it's only when we get out of it, we look back on it, then we can recognize, oh, I was actually feeling very lonely. But when we are in the middle of it, sometimes at least, we can't recognize it. And I think that speaks to a lot of the problems we are experiencing in the world today. Because many of us human beings don't even recognize how lonely we are. We are so busy trying to fill up. We're so busy trying to fill up that feeling and compensate for it that we don't even recognize that actually we are very lonely. And we have to do some deep work on the self. And so maybe having conversations like this will help us. I think having a conversation like this in every school, I believe we should do that. Especially young kids in their teenage years, mid-teens, they feel it's such a lonely place to be. How many of us are talking about this in the school system? I don't know, honestly. I talk to people and they say, no, not much is going on. And I think talking about it will probably make people aware. So when they feel, they can recognize those patterns. And then, they also should have some tools to be able to address those issues. So thank you for mentioning that. But you're right, many a times we don't even recognize that what I am doing is out of neediness coming from loneliness, and I'm trying to compensate. So for example, if somebody just wants to go out and have sex with somebody, are they even aware that maybe it is coming from a space of deep loneliness? Maybe they don't even recognize that. And they just go and they do it, and then they get drunk and they don't even know what's going on. Honestly, I have heard of cases of so many young women being sexually assaulted. Where is that assault coming from? Do these men even recognize what is happening inside them to exploit a woman like that? They don't, because they have no idea what's happening inside them. And that's why I think it is so important from a social perspective that we need to be able to talk about this, and we need to be able to address it. Otherwise, we end up creating so much trauma for others and for ourselves. Yes, Bill.
A lot of guys, I can talk for the guy perspective.
Yeah.
A lot of guys, they celebrate the amount of sexual relationships that they've had.
Yeah. You're right.
And it's,
I have friends like that.
it's very difficult to address it, because then you get, because I've tried it on numerous times to address it, you say to them, this is not okay. You are hurting yourself.
Yeah, but it's difficult. So Pierre was saying that, you've known many men who just think it's a matter of pride to have sex with like a number of partners. And when you've tried to talk to them, it's very difficult for them to see that there is a problem. And you say they're actually hurting themselves and perhaps even hurting others, but they're unable to recognize that. But you're right, but that's a big challenge. And maybe because recognizing that would be very painful for them. And being a woman can be very, very difficult, but being a man can also be very, very difficult, because we have learned how a good man is, right? What is it to be? What is it to be? What is it to be like a man? Have to be a man. And we've learned this, and deconstructing that is not easy, because then I have to confront that emptiness inside, and I have to confront that, this desperation with which I'm trying to prove to the world that I'm a man. And the desperation is coming from that neediness, which is coming from this detachment, disconnection from the soul. It's difficult to talk, but that's why I think we should talk about it. That's one of the reasons why we're having these conversations, because we should talk about it. If you don't talk about it, we won't recognize it. If you don't recognize it, we can't transform it. And if we can't transform it, then we keep, creating pain for ourselves and for others in the world.
Breaking pattern.
Precisely, we just repeat the same thing again and again and again. So yeah, breaking the pattern becomes important, but for that, awareness is needed. Yeah. Okay.
Do you think that loneliness and fear is connected?
Absolutely.
Always.
I think so. There is always this some element of fear, also anxiety, but these are closely related concepts sometimes. But certainly there is an element of fear, because we have. So going into that feeling of emptiness, that's scary. I don't even know what I'm going to discover there. And that's the legend of these heroes, Gilgamesh, Hercules, Hanuman, right? You're going into the desert, you're going into the ocean, onto the oceans, you're going into the forest. You don't know what you're going to discover, but you have the strength to be able to go and do that. So there is that understanding. But you're right. I think there is always a fear, because you don't know what, and therefore it also needs some. We need to talk about it, I guess, in more I don't know, nuanced ways, and also give people the tools to confront that fear. We just open up the fear, and then they don't have any tools to confront that fear, and then what do? You don't know what to do with it. So I think meditation in a way prepares us to go into that, because we are learning to be silent and get comfortable with that silence. And I think that's an important skill, getting comfortable in that silence. So when I feel vulnerable, negative experiences coming up, I learn to slip beneath the negative experiences into silence, because silence is always there. These thoughts and emotions and feelings are coming in that space of silence. So it's a practice of learning, training the mind to slip into that silence again and again and again, which is comforting. So when I feel pain and vulnerability and all that, but if I've trained the mind to go into that silence, then I can deal with that vulnerability because I'm feeling that safety of that silence. And that's where I think it can be a good training for the mind to deal with these things. So let's relax once again. And let's reconnect with soul that we've talked about today. That experience of essence, that experience of deep, deep silence that is always there inside us. That silence in which we can see ourselves clearly, in which we can discover ourselves, our purpose, the way we experience meaning in our lives. So let's relax the body again, paying attention to any tension that may be sitting in the body and learning to let go. Pay particular attention to your back and your shoulders and your neck and the tiny muscles of your face. Relax. Once again, imagine that all these thoughts and sensations are like particles of sand in the lake of the mind, and you allow them to settle down into the bottom of this lake. Making the waters of the mind clear, still. And you allow yourself to feel the deep silence of solitude. The silence of soul. The silence that is joyful. Allow yourself to feel the joy of being alone. With yourself in your essence. in the presence of the divine. Within you, or outside you. And just hold on to this deep solitude, this joy of being alone. And holding on to this deep solitude and this joy of being alone. You allow yourself to gently return back to the awareness of this world, ready to engage with it from this space of deep inner strength, the strength of solitude. You allow your eyes to gently blink open. Okay, thank you.